Now, I mentioned one of the causes here. I mentioned one of the things that sabotage our self-worth, and that is when we link our self-worth to something that is unstable or finite, something that is limited and unstable. And that is the creation. That is what people think, what people say. What are people going to, how are people going to view me? And when my source of self-worth and my source of approval for myself, right? And where I stand becomes other people, whether those people are online or those people are my spouse or my family or my friends or my, social circle, I become extremely weak in my own self-worth and I become unstable. And so that's one of the things that sabotages our own concept of ourselves and our own self-esteem and our own self-worth. But there's something else that also sabotages self-worth. And that is the way in which we speak to ourselves. I mentioned before, there's something called negative self-talk. This is one of the most toxic things that we do to ourselves. Now, what does this look like? Basically, this is when we find that we've made a mistake, or maybe we haven't achieved something that we want, or we feel like we failed. And instead of having compassion for ourselves, so take, for example, if a friend of yours, a spouse, a sister, a brother, a child came to you and said, I made a mistake. I failed at this thing, right? I didn't get this right. Imagine how you would speak to that individual. Well, hopefully you would not tell them things like, you're such a failure. You're never actually going to get this right. You're always going to be a failure, and you'll never, ever be successful. And you know what? You're ugly and you're fat also. Like, can you imagine if you talk to someone like that, right? Now, what am I getting at? What I'm getting at here is that this is similar to how some people speak to themselves, right? When we feel like we've done something wrong, or we feel like we failed, how do we speak to ourselves? Do we talk to ourselves like this? Do we say, you're never going to get this right. You're always failing. You're always messing up. You're so stupid. You're so stupid, or I'm so stupid, or I'll never succeed. I'm such a failure. That type of self-talk is absolute poison. It is absolutely toxic. And it is destroying ourselves from the inside. It is destroying our own relationship with ourselves. Imagine if we talk that way to our spouse or to our best friend or to our child. It would destroy that relationship. And that's exactly what's happening internally with our own relationship with ourselves. And so we have to be conscious of this, and we have to be aware that the way we speak to ourselves is extremely important in terms of how strong our own worth will be. And if you can imagine every time we make a mistake that we go and we take out a whip and we start whipping ourselves. Many people are so much harder on themselves even than others are on them. Or sometimes what happens is that we may have had a critical parent in our upbringing, or a critical teacher. And then what happens is we internalize that critic. So we internalize the voice of our parent, or of that individual. Maybe it was a critical spouse. Some people spend years, sometimes decades, in abusive marriages, in marriages where there is verbal abuse, where there is emotional or physical abuse. And then what happens is, unfortunately, is that hearing that type of verbal, that verbal abuse for so long, not only does it damage a person's worth, but that person sometimes starts to internalize that voice, and they start to do it to themselves. They start to think that way of themselves. I've heard of women who used to have a healthy self-image, who used to have very, strong self-worth. And after being in a toxic marriage, after being in an abusive or verbally and emotionally abusive, maybe also physically abusive relationship for so long, it completely destroyed their self-worth. They started to believe those things that they were being told, and they started to internalize it so that they were actually saying those things to themselves. We have to break this. We have to get out of these toxic relationships. We have to get out of these toxic environments, and we have to stop these toxic habits. The self-talk is absolutely essential in terms of whether or not we become healthy internally, and whether or not we have a healthy relationship with ourselves and in order for us to really be able to have a healthy relationship with others, including the Creator. So these are some of the themes that I will talk about more deeply. I'm able to take questions, much more deeply in the class as we have much more time. We have full hours. We have 4 sessions that I do of live Q&A with the students who register. You get access to all of this content as soon as you register, and you get lifetime access to it. You can see it. You can sort of interact with that content immediately and at your own pace and at your own schedule. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps all of us to build a healthy self-worth that is balanced, that is not to any extreme, as I mentioned, the extreme of narcissism, nor is it the extreme of beating ourselves up and having a low sense of self-worth. I ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to have a healthy self-concept and to have a healthy relationship with Him and with the creation. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم سبحانك الله وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. I look forward to, inshallah, interacting with you more in the class, and inshallah having an opportunity to really, really transform our lives for the better, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.